The CEO mocked the black janitor's advice. Then his words saved the billion-dollar company. You're paid to clean the floors, not advise the people who own them. The laughter came quickly, not loud at first. A few executives lowered their eyes toward the polished walnut table. One man covered his smile with a silver pen. Another leaned back in his leather chair and released a quiet breath through his nose. At the head of the boardroom, Richard Caldwell did not laugh. He simply stared. Across the room stood a black janitor holding the handle of a yellow mop bucket. His name was Elijah Carter. He was 58 years old. His dark blue uniform had faded around the elbows. A ring of brass keys rested against his hip. His work shoes were clean but worn, their soles softened by thousands of miles across marble hallways no one remembered he had polished. Behind him, rain struck the glass walls of the 43rd floor. Below, Chicago disappeared beneath gray clouds and ribbons of white headlights. At the front of the room, a screen displayed a map of North America covered with red lines. Factories, warehouses, shipping routes. At the center was one name, Northstar Automated Systems, the company Richard Caldwell intended to purchase before midnight. The price was $4.2 billion. Richard tapped the contract with one finger. Is there something else you'd like to teach us, Mr. Carter? The laughter returned. Elijah looked at the screen, then at the contract, then back at Richard. His hands remained around the wooden mop handle. No, sir, he said quietly. I only wanted to tell you that the numbers don't match. The room became still. Richard tilted his head. What numbers? The production numbers. A young executive named Trevor Mills laughed openly. Production numbers? Elijah nodded. The company says its automated factories operate at 94% efficiency. Richard folded his arms. And that can't be true. Trevor looked around the table. Did the janitor just audit a $4 billion company? A few people laughed. Elijah did not. Richard leaned back. Why can't it be true? Because their energy consumption fell 18% while production supposedly increased 32%. No one spoke. Elijah pointed toward one of the factories on the screen. The machines in those facilities use industrial induction motors. If production increased that much, energy demand should have risen. Trevor shook his head. You've never heard of automation? I have. Then you know software can improve efficiency. Yes. So what's the problem? Elijah looked at the financial chart. If they improved efficiency through new equipment, capital spending should have increased. He moved his finger lower. But it fell. Trevor opened his mouth. Elijah continued. If they pushed older machines harder, maintenance costs should have increased. He pointed again. But maintenance also fell. The room became quieter. Richard's fingers stopped tapping the contract. Elijah looked directly at him. Production went up. Energy went down. Equipment spending went down. Maintenance went down. He paused. All four numbers can't move that way at the same time. The rain grew louder. Richard stared at him. And what exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you check where the products came from. Daniel Whitmore, the company's chief financial officer, leaned forward. His gray suit looked almost silver beneath the ceiling lights. Mr. Carter, Daniel said, how much experience do you have evaluating corporate acquisitions? Elijah looked at him. None, sir. Have you reviewed Northstar's private audits? No, their tax records? No, their supplier contracts. No, Daniel smiled. Then you are forming an accusation based on a few charts you happened to see while cleaning. I didn't make an accusation. What would you call it? A warning. Daniel's smile disappeared. Richard picked up his silver pen. You looked at three numbers on a presentation and decided our entire acquisition team was wrong. No, sir. Then perhaps you should return to doing the job you were hired to do. Elijah lowered his eyes. Yes, sir. He turned toward the door. His mop wool squeaked once against the polished floor. Behind him, Richard spoke again. Some people forget where they belong. Elijah stopped. Only for a second. Then he pushed the bucket into the hallway. The heavy boardroom doors closed behind him. Inside, several executives laughed again. But Richard did not. He stared at the screen. Production up 32%. Energy down 18%. Maintenance down 11%. For the first time in 11 months, doubt entered the room. And across the table, Daniel Whitmore quietly closed a folder. No one noticed his hand was shaking. Elijah arrived at Caldwell Dynamics every morning at 4:40. The city was still dark then. The elevators were empty. The marble floors held the cold from the night. He liked those hours. Before expensive shoes crossed the lobby. Before assistants rushed between meetings. Before voices filled the building with numbers large enough to buy cities. In the quiet, everything was equal. An empty office did not know whether it belonged to a billionaire or an intern. Dust settled on every desk the same way. Elijah worked slowly but never lazily. He emptied trash cans, polished conference tables, replaced light bulbs, fixed loose door handles before anyone reported them. Every morning, he left warm tea beside Samuel, the elderly security guard whose throat became dry during night shifts. Every Friday, he collected unopened food from executive meetings and carried it to a shelter near his apartment. No one asked him to. Most people did not know. To them, Elijah was simply the janitor. The older black man with quiet eyes. The man who stepped aside when executives entered elevators. The man who always said, "Good morning," even when no one answered. One Monday, Trevor Mills entered the elevator while speaking on his phone. Elijah stood in the corner with cleaning supplies. Trevor pressed the button for the 38th floor. The elevator rose. Trevor glanced toward Elijah. "You missed a spot in the west hallway. I'll take care of it." And the executive bathroom was out of paper towels. "I replaced them 20 minutes ago." Trevor nodded without looking at him. Then his phone call ended. For several seconds, they stood in silence. Elijah noticed a financial report beneath Trevor's arm. One chart was upside down. "You may want to check page 17, Elijah said. Trevor looked at him. "What?" "The depreciation forecast." Trevor frowned. "You read it." "I saw the page. And the calculation uses 7 years, but the equipment is rated for 12. Trevor stared. The elevator opened. "You should focus on cleaning," he said. Then he walked away. 2 days later, Elijah found the corrected report in a recycling bin. The depreciation period had been changed to 12 years. No one thanked him. He had not expected them to. Elijah noticed things. He noticed when employees stayed late because they feared losing their jobs. He noticed when young assistants cried in empty stairwells. He noticed when executives spoke kindly in meetings but shouted at cleaners after the doors closed. And he noticed numbers. Numbers had always spoken to him. When he was 8, he repaired his mother's broken radio without instructions. At 12, he built a small electric motor using copper wire and magnets from discarded speakers. At 17, he earned a scholarship to study mechanical engineering. His professors called him gifted. One called him extraordinary. By 32, Elijah had designed efficiency systems for industrial factories. His work reduced energy waste by nearly 40%. For a while, his future seemed endless. Then his wife became sick. Her name was Grace. She taught elementary school. She sang while cooking. She wrote encouraging notes and hid them inside Marcus's lunchbox. Cancer took her strength slowly. Then it took their savings. Elijah left engineering to care for her. He missed meetings, lost contracts, turned down promotions. People told him to hire a nurse. "You're throwing away your career," one colleague warned. Elijah looked through the hospital window. Grace was sleeping. "I can rebuild a career. And if you can't," Elijah watched his wife breathe, "then I'll build something else." Grace survived 3 years. During the final winter, she could no longer walk. Elijah carried her from the bedroom to the window every morning. She liked watching snow. One afternoon, she touched his hand. "You're going to be angry after I'm gone." "No, you will." "I won't." "You'll be angry at time." Elijah looked away. "At doctors." He said nothing. "At yourself." "Grace, promise me something." "What?" "Don't let pain make you cruel." Elijah closed his eyes. "I promise." She squeezed his hand. "And never let a small job make your heart small." 2 weeks later, Grace died. The world did not stop. Bills continued arriving. Marcus was 14. Elijah accepted whatever work he could find. Repair jobs, warehouse shifts, night cleaning. Years passed. Engineering changed. Software replaced drawings. Companies stopped seeing experience. They saw an old resume, a long employment gap, a black man approaching 60. Eventually, Caldwell Dynamics hired him, not as an engineer, as a janitor. Elijah never complained. Work was work. Dignity did not depend on a title. For 6 years, he cleaned the same building. Then Northstar appeared. Every night for 3 weeks, its numbers glowed on the boardroom screen. At first, Elijah ignored them. Then he noticed the contradiction. Production rising, energy falling, maintenance falling, worker hours falling, everything improving at once. Machines did not behave that way. Factories did not behave that way. Numbers did not lie. But people used numbers to lie every day. And somewhere inside Northstar's perfect reports, Elijah believed someone was hiding something. Richard Caldwell had built his life around never appearing uncertain. At 46, he controlled a company worth $18 billion. Business magazines called him fearless. Investors called him brilliant. Employees called him Mr. Caldwell. Never Richard. His suits were handmade. His office occupied the entire top floor. Its windows looked down upon Chicago as though the city belonged to him. Richard believed weakness was expensive. His father had taught him that. Arthur Caldwell had built the company from a small industrial supply business. He had also built his son with rules. Never apologize in public. Never let employees see doubt. Never trust kindness from someone who wants something. People respect power, Arthur used to say. Kindness only teaches them how much they can take. Richard remembered every word. When he became CEO, he fired 3,000 employees during his first year. The stock rose. Investors praised him. His father shook his hand. Well done. That was the closest Arthur ever came to saying he was proud. Northstar was supposed to become Richard's greatest victory. The acquisition would make Caldwell Dynamics the largest automated manufacturing company in North America. Wall Street expected the announcement by morning. Banks were waiting. Investors were celebrating. Richard had spent 11 months building the deal. He could not allow a janitor to place doubt inside the room. Yet after Elijah left, Richard continued staring at the screen. Energy down 18%. Production up 32%. Maintenance down 11%. He looked toward Daniel. Explain it. Daniel smiled. Automation efficiency. Equipment upgrades. Software optimization. No new machines? Not necessary. Richard tapped his pen. What about maintenance? Predictive systems. The answers arrived quickly. Too quickly. Richard glanced toward the closed boardroom doors. Then shook his head. He felt foolish. A janitor had made him question a team of lawyers, accountants, and engineers. Continue, Richard ordered. The meeting resumed. At 10:42 p.m., the final contract was placed before him. Daniel pushed it across the table. Once you sign, the transfer begins. Richard opened the document. For $1 billion. 11 months. His legacy. He picked up the silver pen. The tip touched the paper. Then the lights flickered. Only once. Richard looked up. Outside the glass wall, Elijah pushed his mop bucket toward the service elevator. For reasons Richard could not explain, he remembered the janitor's words. Machines working harder require more maintenance, not less. Daniel leaned forward. Something wrong. Richard stared at the signature line. No, but he did not sign. Run the numbers again. Daniel blinked. We already have. Run them again. The deadline is midnight. Then work faster. Daniel looked around the room. Richard, delaying could damage the agreement. Checking numbers doesn't damage agreements. It signals distrust. Richard met his eyes. Should I trust them? A silence followed. Daniel smiled. Of course. Richard placed the pen on the table. Then one more review won't hurt. Daniel nodded. But beneath the table, his fingers closed tightly around his phone. 3 minutes later, he sent a message. We have a problem. At 11:20, Elijah was cleaning the employee cafeteria. Most lights were off. Rainwater ran down the windows. He moved chairs carefully, lifting each one instead of dragging it. The door opened. Daniel entered. He removed his glasses. You caused a problem upstairs. Elijah continued wiping the table. I only shared what I noticed. No one asked. No, sir. Daniel stepped closer. Do you know how many people reviewed that deal? No, hundreds. Elijah nodded. And you believe you're smarter than all of them? No, then why speak? Elijah stopped cleaning. He folded the cloth once. Because I believe the company might be in danger. Daniel laughed. The company? Yes. This company pays you to empty trash. Yes, sir. It doesn't belong to you. No, then why care? For the first time, Elijah studied him. Because 17,000 people work here. Daniel said nothing. They have mortgages, Elijah continued. Children. Parents who need medicine. That isn't your responsibility. Maybe not. Elijah picked up the cloth. But knowing something may hurt people and staying silent, he paused. That becomes your responsibility. Daniel's expression hardened. You need to forget what you saw. Elijah looked at him. Why? The word was quiet. Something changed in Daniel's face. Only for a moment. Then he smiled. Because you don't understand it. Maybe. You do understand that speaking outside your role can cost you your job? Yes. And you still did it? Yes. Daniel stared at him. Why? Elijah placed the cloth on the table. My wife used to say silence is also a decision. Daniel stepped closer. Your wife isn't here. Elijah's eyes changed. The room became still. Daniel seemed to realize he had crossed a line, but he did not apologize. Instead, he put on his glasses. Forget Northstar. Elijah watched him walk away. At the door, Daniel stopped. If anyone asks, you misunderstood the charts. I didn't. Daniel turned. That wasn't a request. The door closed. Elijah stood alone. Rain tapped against the windows. For the first time, he was no longer worried only about Northstar. He was worried about Daniel. The next morning, Elijah arrived at 4:40. His employee badge did not work. He tried again. Red light. Samuel, the security guard, looked uncomfortable. Mr. Carter, Elijah already understood. Two managers waited inside. One held an envelope. Your employment has been terminated. Why? Unauthorized interference in executive operations. Elijah looked through the glass doors. Employees crossed the lobby. Some slowed. Most looked away. May I collect my things? They've been packed. A cardboard box rested beside the desk. Inside were work gloves, Grace's photograph, an old engineering notebook, and a coffee cup Marcus had given him. Best Dad. Elijah lifted the box. The elevator opened. Richard stepped into the lobby. Their eyes met. Elijah waited. Perhaps for an explanation. Perhaps for an apology. Richard adjusted his cuff. You disrupted a critical meeting. I warned you. You embarrassed senior executives. That wasn't my intention. Intentions don't protect companies. Elijah looked at him. Neither does pride. The lobby became silent. Richard's jaw tightened. You should leave. Elijah nodded. He carried the box toward the doors. Outside, snow had begun falling. Small white flakes melted against his dark coat. He stopped beneath the building's enormous glass entrance. Then he turned. Mr. Caldwell. Richard watched from inside. Check Northstar Factory number 7. Richard frowned. Why? The electricity data. What about it? The factory supposedly operated every day last year. Yes. Elijah held the box against his chest. But its power records show no activity on 43 nights. Richard said nothing. If the machines weren't running, Elijah looked through the glass. What were they producing? Then he walked away. Richard watched until the snow swallowed him. Behind Richard, Daniel entered the lobby. What did he say? Richard turned. Nothing important. Daniel nodded. But relief crossed his face. Richard saw it. And for the first time, he wondered why. Snow covered the sidewalks. Elijah sat alone at a bus stop. The cardboard box rested beside him. His hands were cold. Through the glass shelter, Caldwell Tower rose above the city. 43 floors. Thousands of windows. He had cleaned many of them. Now he was outside. Grace's photograph rested on top of the box. Elijah picked it up. She was smiling. The picture had been taken 20 years earlier. Before hospitals. Before debt. Before silence filled their home. You spoke when it mattered, he whispered. The wind carried the words away. His phone rang. Marcus. Dad. Morning, son. You working? Elijah looked at the building. No, a pause. What happened? They let me go. Why? I said something they didn't want to hear. Marcus became quiet. Were you right? Elijah watched snow gather on his shoes. I hope I wasn't. Why? Because if I was, a lot of people could lose everything. Marcus sighed. You always worry about people who don't worry about you. Elijah smiled faintly. Your mother used to say that. She also said you were stubborn. That too. Come stay with me. I'm fine. You're sitting at a bus stop, aren't you? Elijah looked around. How did you know? You always sit somewhere when you're hurt. Elijah said nothing. Marcus softened his voice. Dad, you don't have to be strong every second. Elijah looked at Grace's photograph. I know, but he did not. Inside Caldwell Tower, Richard stood before a wall of screens. Factory number 7. Power consumption. Production reports. Shipping records. The numbers did not match. One analyst whispered, That's impossible. Richard turned. Check again. They did. The answer remained. Northstar claimed the factory produced $380 million in equipment, but the machines had been inactive. Richard felt cold. Where did the products come from? No one answered. Then an analyst found another file. Sir, what? These shipping identification numbers repeat. How many? Hundreds. What does that mean? The analyst swallowed. The same products may have been counted multiple times. Richard looked toward Daniel. Did your team review this? Daniel adjusted his glasses. These records weren't included in the original audit. Why not? I don't know. Richard stepped closer. You approve the audit based on the available information. Then find the missing information. Daniel closed his laptop. I need to call Northstar. No, Daniel stopped. Richard looked toward security. Give us the room. The analysts left. The doors closed. Richard stood across from Daniel. Did you know? Know what? That the numbers were false. Of course not. Look at me. Daniel did. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Richard noticed something. Daniel's left hand was trembling. Open your laptop. What? Open it. This is ridiculous. Open the laptop. Daniel picked it up, then suddenly turned toward the door. Security blocked him. Richard stared. Daniel. No answer. Where are you going? Daniel's face had become pale. Home. No. Richard looked toward security. Check his computer. Daniel stepped back. You don't have the authority. Richard's voice became quiet. It's my company. Security took the laptop. Daniel lunged toward it. And in that instant, Richard knew. The janitor had been right. But the truth was worse than anyone imagined. By noon, federal investigators filled the building. Daniel had received $12 million through offshore accounts connected to Northstar. He had hidden the fraud, changed reports, pressured analysts, removed energy records, and fired the only man who noticed. The acquisition was canceled 17 minutes before billions transferred. News spread quickly. Caldwell Dynamics escapes historic corporate fraud. Investors celebrated. The stock rose. Richard did not. He sat alone. On his desk was Elijah's employee file. Carter, Elijah J. Position, janitor, night operations. 6 years. No complaints. No absences. Richard turned the page. Attached was the resume Elijah submitted when he first applied. Mechanical engineer. Industrial efficiency specialist. For patents. Research award. Richard leaned closer. One project appeared familiar. Adaptive motor efficiency framework. Richard opened the company database. Caldwell Dynamics had used a modified version of that system for 9 years. It had saved the company more than $600 million. Richard read the original patent. At the bottom was one name, Elijah James Carter. Richard leaned back. The company had earned hundreds of millions from technology built upon Elijah's work. Yet Elijah had spent 6 years cleaning its floors. Richard called human resources. Why wasn't he hired as an engineer? A woman answered. His experience was considered outdated. He designed systems we still use. There was a 20-year employment gap. Why? I don't know. Richard opened another document. Emergency family leave. Medical debt. Caregiver history. Grace Carter. Deceased. He saw an old photograph attached to an insurance form. Elijah stood beside a woman in a hospital bed. She was smiling. He was holding her hand. Richard stared at the picture. His own father had died alone in a private hospital room. Richard had been in Tokyo closing a deal. He remembered the final voicemail. Call when you have time. Richard never did. For years, he told himself business required sacrifice. Now he looked at Elijah, a man who sacrificed a career to remain beside someone he loved. Which man had been stronger? Richard closed the file, then asked his assistant, "Where is Mr. Carter?" "We don't know." "Find him." Elijah was repairing a heater at the community shelter when 3 black cars stopped outside. People gathered near the windows. Richard entered alone. No assistants. No lawyers. No expensive coat. Only a man carrying a cardboard box. Elijah stood. "Mr. Caldwell." Richard placed the box on a table. "You saved my company. I warned you. You saved 17,000 jobs. Then I'm glad you listened." Richard looked down. "I didn't." Elijah waited. "Not when I should have." Silence filled the shelter. "I mocked you." "Yes." "I allowed you to be fired." "Yes." "I judged your intelligence by your uniform." Elijah said nothing. Richard looked around. "You were right about Northstar." "I know." "And Daniel." Elijah lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Richard frowned. "Why?" "Because betrayal hurts." Richard stared at him. He had expected anger. Instead, Elijah offered understanding. That hurt more. Richard removed an envelope. "I want you back." "As a janitor?" "No." Richard took a breath. "Director of Industrial Integrity." Elijah looked at the envelope. "You would oversee safety, efficiency, and internal review. Why? Because you see what other people ignore. Elijah remained silent. And because you spoke when silence would have been easier. Richard extended his hand. Elijah did not take it. An apology isn't a job offer, Elijah said. Richard slowly lowered his hand. No, you don't repair humiliation with a salary. I understand. Do you? Richard looked toward the floor. No, the answer surprised them both. Elijah studied him, then pointed toward several broken tables. Help me. Richard blinked. What? These tables need moving. Richard looked at the tables, then at his suit. Elijah waited. Richard removed his jacket. For the next hour, the billionaire CEO carried tables beside the man he had mocked. No cameras, no reporters, no applause. At one point, Richard dropped one end. The table struck the floor. Everyone turned. Elijah looked at him. You all right? Richard nodded. I'm not used to this. Most things become easier when you stop pretending you already know how. Richard laughed. Not because the words were funny, because they were true. When they finished, his expensive shirt was covered in dust. Elijah handed him water. Richard accepted it. Why are you being kind to me? Elijah looked across the shelter. Because cruelty doesn't become right when the right person uses it. Richard lowered his eyes. What if I don't deserve kindness? Kindness isn't a reward. Then what is it? A choice. Richard stared at the water bottle. I don't know how to change. Elijah sat beside him. You listened eventually. After humiliating you. Yes. After firing you. Yes. Richard looked at him. Why aren't you angry? I am. The answer surprised Richard. Elijah continued. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending something didn't hurt. Then you forgive me? I haven't decided. Richard nodded. That's fair. Elijah looked toward the envelope. If I return, things change. Name them. Every employee can report concerns without punishment. Agreed. Cleaning staff attends safety meetings. Richard hesitated. Why? Because they enter every room. Richard thought about it. Agreed. No employee is called just anything. Richard looked at him. Elijah continued. No, just a janitor. No, just a driver. No, just an assistant. Richard nodded. Agreed. And Daniel's assistant. What about her? She probably knew something. We're investigating. Ask why she stayed silent. Richard frowned. You think she was involved? No, then why? Fear. Elijah stood. Fear hides more truth than dishonesty. Richard looked at the envelope. Will you come back? Elijah picked it up. I'll think about it. When I know you want change more than you want good publicity. Then he walked toward the broken heater. Richard remained seated. For the first time in his life, he had offered someone power. And the man had asked for dignity instead. If this moment touched your heart, remember Elijah's choice. He had every reason to humiliate the man who humiliated him. Instead, he chose truth without cruelty. Because kindness isn't weakness. It is strength powerful enough to change another human being. 3 months later, morning sunlight entered Caldwell Tower. Employees crossed the marble lobby. Near the elevators was a new office. The glass door carried silver letters. Elijah Carter, Director of Industrial Integrity. Elijah arrived at 6:10. Still early. Still wearing his old work shoes. Near the lobby, a young janitor struggled with a broken floor machine. Executives walked around him. Elijah stopped. He removed his jacket. Kneeling beside the machine, he opened the control panel. You know how to fix this? The young man asked. Elijah smiled. A little. Minutes later, the machine started. The young janitor laughed. Across the lobby, Richard watched. He walked toward them. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Elijah stood. Good morning, Richard. Not Mr. Caldwell. Richard smiled. Then he extended his hand. This time, Elijah accepted it. Employees began entering the lobby. Some stopped. One young executive approached a cleaner near the elevator. Good morning, he said. The cleaner looked surprised, then smiled. Good morning. Richard noticed. So did Elijah. Neither spoke. Outside, sunlight moved. Across Chicago. Inside, the polished floor reflected everyone equally. Executives, assistants, security guards, cleaners. Near the elevators, Richard looked toward the old yellow mop bucket. It had been placed inside a glass display. Beside it was a small plaque. The warning that saved 17,000 jobs came from a man we failed TOC. Elijah read it, then shook his head. What's wrong? Richard asked. It gives the bucket too much credit. Richard smiled. What should it say? Elijah looked across the lobby. Listen before a title tells you who matters. Richard nodded. The next morning, the plaque was changed. No ceremony. No reporters. Only new words beneath an old yellow bucket. Years later, employees would walk past it. Some would stop. Some would tell the story. About the night a black janitor noticed 4 numbers that did not belong together. About the executives who laughed. About the CEO who refused to listen. About the warning that saved a billion-dollar company. But Elijah never called himself a hero. Whenever someone thanked him, he gave the same answer. I saw something wrong. Then he would pause. And I chose not to walk past it. On a quiet Friday evening, Elijah stood alone inside his new office. The city glowed beyond the windows. On his desk was Grace's photograph. Beside it rested his old engineering notebook. He opened to the first page. Years earlier, Grace had written one sentence there. Never let a small job make your heart small. Elijah touched the words. Outside his office, the building slowly became quiet. Lights turned off. Elevators stopped. Footsteps faded. Then Richard passed the open door. He stopped. Going home. In a minute. Richard noticed the photograph. Grace. Elijah nodded. She would be proud. Elijah looked toward the city. She'd tell me not to stay late. Richard smiled. Smart woman. The smartest. Richard walked away. Elijah closed the notebook. He switched off the light. Then he stepped into the hallway. For 6 years, he had walked that corridor carrying a mop while people looked through him. Now his name stood on a glass door. But that was not the victory. The victory was not the office. Not the salary. Not the title. It was that 17,000 people still had jobs. It was that a frightened assistant had begun speaking. It was that cleaners now attended safety meetings. It was that Richard had learned to ask questions before giving orders. Elijah walked toward the elevator. The doors opened. Inside stood a young employee holding several reports. She moved aside. After you, Mr. Carter. Elijah smiled. No, he held the door. After you. She stepped inside. The doors slowly closed. Outside, snow began falling over Chicago. White flakes touched the glass. Far below, headlights moved through the streets like quiet rivers of gold. And on the 43rd floor, beneath the same light that once exposed humiliation, an empty boardroom waited in silence. The walnut table had been polished. The chairs were still. The billion-dollar contract was gone. But near the doorway, almost invisible beneath the evening glow, remained one small mark from the wheel of an old yellow mop bucket. No one cleaned it. Richard had asked them not to, because some reminders were not meant to disappear. And sometimes the person everyone walks past is the one carrying the truth that saves them all.